Really quick, Mark, but before you jump in there, I just want to kind of give everybody sort of context in terms of why we're doing some of these presentations and how it sort of fits into the overall concept. So remember, the purpose of this event really is for us to do strategic planning for GBA going into the future. And so some of the things that we've shared with you yesterday and we're sharing with you today are some strategic projects and some strategic activities, right? So what we would like the participants in this event to do is to absorb all this and give us feedback. Hey, I really think that we ought to go down that path. I really like what Mark and Teresa were talking about. Hey, I think it's a distraction. But it's really to share with you what we've been working on, where we're planning on going, and to getting your feedback on that. So with that, Mark, the floor is yours.
Hey everyone, I'm Mark Wasser, the Chief Technical Officer of the GBA. What I'm going to be describing here is a passion project that I've had for years, but which I think fits very, very well into governance and the law and voting as well. So basically, political discourse in America is a mess. We have no clue of even what reality is. Basically, Republicans believe one thing happened, Democrats believe another thing happened, and the independents are unsure. And most of our TV ads prior to elections are misleading at best, if not outright conducive to understanding the wrong thing about each politician's beliefs. So at this point, it's very, very tough to get the information that you need to cast an informed vote. Now, there have been some very good solutions for this. From 2010 to 2015, Washington State put out a really good voter's guide. It was online. It allowed for the community to interact, to ask questions, to make comments. It was powered by a program, a service that's still around called Consider It. And basically, it allowed everyone to indicate how strongly they agreed or disagreed with a proposal, a piece of legislation or whatever. And it was also very helpful in that it laid out the pros and cons of each side. And these pros and cons were elevated by individual citizens just liking them. The things with the most likes floated to the top, most of the garbage quickly dropped to the bottom. And it was actually a very, very effective means of informing the voters until, unfortunately, the legislature changed hands and the project was shut down. So there's an interesting question. Most people, or sorry, most researchers are very aware of the fact that when they're debating, humans really don't think well at all. We have these tremendous cognitive biases. The worst is the confirmation effect. Basically, we tend to pay attention to those facts or opinions that support our views, and we tend to quickly dismiss those which don't support our views. And when we are arguing given points, not only do we tend to stress the points that we believe, but we really, really believe them. It makes us more convincing, it sways people to our cause. And the good thing is that the net effect is that in general, as a group, collectively, we actually make the best decisions. Unfortunately, as we've recently learned, that doesn't hold true once people become less flexible and become unwilling to entertain other points of view. So one of our major goals here is how do we get the flow of information to everyone so that those who are willing to potentially change their mind, to potentially um, work towards intermediate solutions can actually gain some traction. So in the early 2000s, there was a movement towards actually trying to map out arguments of this type. It was actually done much more for business. For example, what can we do about the budget? It gives a variety of suggestions. It discusses why each of those things are good and bad and what you can do, and attaches facts to them. Um, this was a really great process, and it looked like it was really taking off, but for some reason it appears to have pretty much died in the late 20 teens. And honestly, I'm not quite sure why. Some other efforts to get facts, or at least to get correct facts out there, is to actually attach comments to every internet page. Now, in one sense, this is awesome, but it really isn't scalable. You've basically got billions of people attaching comments to even more pages. There's no way in which good comments float up or go down. This effort reasonably quickly failed. Um, Canonizer is a really great project on one hand, but again suffers from scalability. What they do is they pick specific topics and actually outline what the various camps are. So you can get a good feeling for what the various arguments are for given positions. The unfortunate thing is that the structure is basically immutable, and arguments really need to be able to be rearranged properly for them to make sense. I do, however, recommend going to the site, perusing it. It's got some very interesting debates. The one they tend to advertise most is actually the various views of consciousness. And it's a wonderful overview and a really great illustration of how people with radically different views can actually hold a reasonable debate through a method like this. This project was also intended to act as a distributed autonomous organization. Their charter is actually such that they were intending to perform their governance via this method. And it's definitely something worth looking into because it's still live. And if you manage to get a hold of Brent Alsop, which actually isn't that tough, you can learn some fascinating things. Quick shout out to some of our own GBA members. Joshua is even the head of the Artificial Intelligence Working Group. They too are trying to connect the various pages on the internet for relevance and supporting facts and the like. We've had many discussions about this. My concern, once again, is that this may not be scalable, so they are definitely amenable to some pushes in that direction. So this is another effort that's very much worth watching. They're actually kicking some major systems live in about a third of a year or so, if I remember correctly. So as people are interested in what's being suggested here for governance, this is definitely a project to watch. So getting back to Whately, I've added here the comment that we need a scalable solution. It seems as if everything that's proposed this far is somewhat problematic in that it's tough to isolate it down to a reasonable source of information in terms of everyone being able to contribute, but making it so that wading through it isn't impossible. The Washington Voters Guide did an excellent job of it. And this is the type of thing that we would like to do, where it's actually possible to focus on specific issues instead of trying to police the entire internet. So if you're curious where the name came from and to give me a quick chance to grab a drink, here's where the name came from. So the question always is, why blockchain? Some of the best answers in this case are that blockchain makes it very easy for many individuals to work together in a trustless environment. This is particularly good for peer review. There is something called token curated registries. Basically, there is cryptocurrency incentives for making good reviews of something, with the same way in which many likes caused the best pros and cons to rise to the top for the Washington living ballot. We can make it so that people who make popular or common upvotes can actually receive some small amounts of remuneration for making those choices. In particular, this method is already used on a number of blogging websites, the most noteworthy being Hive, or as it was previously known, Steam. And it also gives more cryptocurrency for those who find previously unfound but excellent content. And via this method, you can pretty much be assured that the content floats to the top. It becomes much easier to get the best arguments, and you're actually paying people to do it, which is very, very important because there is some amount of work involved. And there are also people who could desperately use the income providing this service for others. There are the normal advantages of blockchain, immutability being very important. We've got far, far too much revisionist history, but it's actually great for also being able to get the necessary information for tracking trends and the like. Also, since it's blockchain, everyone can get to it. It's got a very simple interface for grabbing data. It's wonderful for third-party tools, analytics, things of that sort. And this is a huge undertaking, and there are many ways in which it can go, and blockchain just makes it expandable. So we really can divide the functionality of this into two types. One is we can do what the Washington State application did, which is just show ballot questions, give good information about them. The Washington State system was incredibly popular. And really something similar to it should exist for voter education everywhere. For me, it's far more important, though, to find out about the politicians. It's very, very frustrating to try and decide who to vote for. A lot of people have given up on primaries, and then they tend to vote based on whether or not there's an R or a D next to the person's name. I believe that politicians really should be detailing their views rather than attacking others, especially with misinformation. If we've got a one-stop shop for all this information, it would be extremely helpful. If people are willing to provide this information about a given politician, and trust me, there are lots of people willing to provide such information, particularly about opposing politicians. Um, if a politician's office then finds the need to get the truth out there, there will be official statements of his views, and those can be questioned. And of course, anything that isn't answered will tend to be to their detriment. And the greatest thing here is that there are no sound bites. There are no tricks like, oh, this first person voted against X view 17 times when, well, they voted against that view because there were poison pills in the bill and things of that sort. It would also be very, very good if we could get some legislation review. Over the past week, it's been very, very interesting to see numerous news articles that said, we asked Republicans what critical race theory was, and none of them could answer. They've already proposed legislation. It's been asked, so in the bill, how will you define this? What's going on? And their answer is like, well, you'll see it when the bill is, fleshed out. And we only want to have a discussion. And this is really, really contrary to any sort of tracking of governance. The process has to be fixed. The amount of late amendments that happen to many bills, in many ways, it's been proposed to not allow irrelevant amendments to bills, but I'm not sure that that will ever happen. So one thing, or half of what this system hopefully does, is it performs voter education. The second half is to actually allow voters to have some sort of influence over the political process. If a voter gives information on what they believe, it means that it makes it possible to have better surveys. It also would be possible to ask questions like, what is your priorities? What is most important to you? What should be paid attention to? What should just be entirely dropped? It also could be used to compare the voters' opinions with each of the candidates and actually suggest what candidate most closely matches what the voter wants. Again, it makes voting easier in terms of correctly choosing the politician who really represents what you believe, rather than just having to do the blind guess of, oh, well, this guy has the right letter, so he must be proposing and voting for the things that I would vote for. In the long run, this could be a real education tool for any particular arguments that we might have in society. It gives the chance to actually clarify views. And we have a real problem coming up in terms of artificial intelligence, whether it's tool type systems that offer advice that need to be regulated and the like, or whether you've actually got artificial entities, because there's a real concern among a large number of AI scientists and the like, not to mention people like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, who believe in a Terminator type scenario, that we really do need to be able to rigorously outline acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And one of the major problems with that currently is that most of the researchers are looking for the absolutely correct behavior, and there's no absolutely correct behavior. There's a wide range of opinions, and we want to form the structures that give the range of what's acceptable, why it's acceptable, and why the reasoning even works. There are all sorts of cases where there are these moral dilemmas, and everyone pretends as if this means that we have drastically different views on morality. And if you dig deeper into it, you find that people tend to agree on moral issues. The problem is that the priority between them is heavily influenced by circumstances and beliefs and things of that sort. Um, the debates of abortion versus gun control are debates about autonomy versus life. And yet it's interesting because the opposing political parties take the opposite opinions on which is more important from each other and based upon the issues. So realistically, it's actually possible to map out why particular groups of people make particular decisions. Um, a lot of the uh, people attempting to do this without a lot of information don't realize that there actually is a consensus among the social psychologists as to what morality is. And instead of defining details, they argue that the function of morality is simply to suppress selfishness and to make it possible to live together cooperatively. And once you have a foundation like that, then you can actually start building out a complete system, which then conceivably can be programmed into systems and or artificial entities as necessary.
Hey, Mark, can I just interject one thing real quick? So just everybody in the room, when Mark wraps up here, we want to give folks an opportunity to give feedback, ask questions. So I just dropped into the auditorium chat, the Zoom link, if you've joined us recently. So feel free to jump in. If you are in the Zoom link, we ask that you only stay in for the period of asking your questions, having the conversation. But if you are in the Zoom link, please raise your hand. So as soon as Mark wraps up his presentation, we can entertain a couple questions. Mark did start a little bit late, so that may cut into Rob's session a little bit. We'll push into lunch just a little bit. Hopefully, give everybody a chance.
And obviously, everyone can tell that that last point is one that I'm particularly passionate about. I'm actually an AI person, and I've been working in AI ethics and publishing in AI ethics for the past dozen or so years. So if you want to have me talk your ear off, that'd be great.
And listen, one more thing I want to say about Mark. And Mark, this is something I appreciate about you so much. Mark and I are on polar opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to certain our political beliefs. But what I love about Mark is he's incredibly fair and open-minded, and he and I can have these discussions from a position of logic and communication as opposed to bumper stickers and arguing past each other. And so, Mark, as you're presenting this, I'm hearing in you the embodiment of fair, data-driven, honest conversations. And even though we disagree in some respects on almost everything, I just really appreciate your intellectual integrity in this area. So I just want to give you a quick little shout out.
Thank you. And of course, for the GBA, some future applications are so-called liquid democracy, where voting is actually done always pretty much real time by everyone. This is actually true democracy where people can vote for individuals to govern them and change the votes at any time. More effectively, it's often worthwhile to actually have a hierarchy where people can choose individuals to represent them on given issues. And then these hierarchies work their way up as those people vote on someone who can represent a larger group on that issue, and so on and so forth until you actually get um, legislators who are there full time, but their sway over various types of bills can vary. There's also the opportunity for consensus budgeting. We might be able to solve some of our taxation problems by allowing people to actually feel as if they're getting a say in how their money is being spent. At any rate, this is going to be a large system, but it actually has the advantage that we can work on it small pieces at a time. And people can work on what's most interesting to them. And hopefully, slowly but surely, it will grow to be an immense system that might actually stand a chance to change, to span the whole of what our political debate or our current um, political concerns are. And let me turn it over.
I see Pavel's hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mark. I would like to add that almost the same questions we have inside our community, and we now in the process of launching a very interesting contest. Since that problem of verifying information and writing something which is correct, it's a huge in modern world, and there is a place where where all those problems are. You can see the problems of it. So, for example, Wikipedia, the big project Wikipedia, they have exactly the same problems when discussing what even like name of a city. They can spend 3 years of discussing how to name Gdańsk or Gdańsk, how to write, how to spell it. So we now combined all problems of Wikipedia government management governance all together, and we're now launching a contest for specification for that governance, which will motivate more people to join, which will prohibit or mitigate that problem, but because then they now have admins, so there no any transparent process of decision making. It is debate, and then somebody makes some decision without any transparency. So it's very similar to what you presented. And we would like to crowdsource
Actually,
for that governance. Yeah.
Actually, it's very, very different from what I'm proposing. Wikipedia attempts to present one neutral view, and what I would like to do here is to present every believed view in proportion to the number of people who believe it. Voting on a city name, for example, is somewhat problematic. You can have 50.00001% of the people preferring something over 49.9999% of people, and yet they get to make the decision, and the opposite view is no longer represented. One of the things that I'm very, very interested in is showing the reality of what people believe and why they believe it. Fact checking may come in at the level of, for instance, videos of the size of crowds and things of that sort. But really at the topmost level, and where I have problems with previous efforts in terms of peer review and fact checking the internet, is that most of those are exercises in expressing opinions as opposed to fairly representing views.
I understand what you're saying. Actually, my view on that it will end up with different views on Wikipedia as well, because what is now there is not fair. There are numbers of examples when so that neutral approach. I mean, you can have it in one article, different views, or you can have some alternative articles which you can explore. So I understand what you say, and I fully agree that for political debate, you need to clearly express different views, and you can provide ability to people to challenge, fact check, but still there are two different views. But I'm just saying that consensus process for each particular set of views, it should have governance behind it. And we are really, yeah.
And currently, as you say, Wikipedia's governance is performed by moderators.
Yeah, it's crap.
I strongly believe that it should be automatic governance performed by the blockchain. You know, I know you agree with that because you're implementing a version of that yourself. And while the structure of each individual part of the argument might be a little bit tough to understand unless you're reading that sort of thing, there's also all sorts of very good AI tools at this point that will turn concept maps or debate maps of that type into something that's very friendly and very human readable.
Yeah, I see your point. Thanks.
Guys, we need to wrap up fairly soon because we're about 15 minutes out after the hour. Mark, there's a comment my hand posted in the auditorium. Says any politician is representative of the public who will be the bridge between the government officials and the public to ensure that things are in place as required for the public to use, support, and live in peace. I think AI will replace. Any thoughts and comments on that, Mark?
So, some number of years back, I actually wrote an article on that. So I should try and bring it up again. The answer is that in some senses that AI will become better than most people are, but not as much better as you might think. And again, that starts getting into emotion-driven AI and things of that sort. It's likely to be necessary for safety and the like, that AI will have to have a lot of a similar mental architecture to humans. But once again, I could go on about this for hours.
I got one last sort of personal question, and then we really got to turn it back over to Rob for the work himself. But how do you stop or prevent all the fake bots? So right now, I believe that both sides are using technology to create public opinion by having all kinds of millions of fake posts. How do we deal with that? And then after that, you can turn it back over to Rob.
I think that's going to come down to identity management systems. These multiple bots are basically a Sybil attack, which is when many identical processes, whether it's a human brain or a very stupid, simple machine algorithm, gets amplified by numbers. And the only way to fix that is to basically only allow one human being or one artificial entity or one collective intelligence to express opinions once, because, you know, that this is a huge problem, as you well know. And there are ways of anonymizing people, yet ensuring that they get only one voice. And I think that's a major part of what the GBA also needs to work towards in the identity management and self-sovereign identity groups.
So, can I ask?
Frederick has his hand up, but to dovetail on what you just said, Mark, not just the individual as a person, but also these individual organizations that have such great influence, and they themselves internally need a debate infrastructure like this so that they can come to terms in what they would suggest. For instance, a veteran service organization that meets and votes and decides on what they're going to push through the legislature, a League of Women Voters, or a Realtors Association. But the problem is we don't have all this information in one place where a voter can compare side by side all of the candidates with readily available data. But and to Frederick?
Yeah, I just had a question. Yeah, so here would the idea be that we then would be able to have to see the viewpoints of people in general, or really identified people? Because then the other question is, what about time? Do we allow people to change their viewpoints, or once we have one viewpoint, it's forever, as it seems to be like today?
We absolutely have to allow people to change their views with time. That was part of what I was mentioning in terms of retrospectives. If you look at the huge shift in, say, LGBT rights and marriage over the past 10 years, I mean, it's gone from a substantial minority to a substantial majority. And people have to be able to represent that shift in their views.
Well, Justice Powell, he felt that way when he was in the beginning of his career, the Supreme Court Justice. He changed his mind. We absolutely have to be able to change our minds. That's changing is essential.